Have you ever paused in the quiet of your own room and wondered what it means to still feel desire long after the world assumes you no longer should? What does it mean to crave touch when your hair has grayed, your skin has softened, and your body no longer moves the way it once did? For many older adults, these questions go unanswered, not because they lack meaning, but because society rarely invites us to ask them out loud. Today we begin a different kind of conversation, one that is gentle, honest, and long overdue. In our younger years, physical intimacy is often painted as something bold, passionate, and fast. But with age, that canvas begins to change. The strokes become softer, the colors shift, and somewhere in that quiet transformation, pleasure finds new shape. It becomes less about urgency and more about presence, less about performance and more about connection. Sometimes that connection begins not with another person, but within yourself. This is where the journey of self-pleasure begins, not as a secret, not as something shameful, but as a return to the body you have lived in for decades, a return to the self that still longs to be held, to be noticed, to be loved, even by your own hands. Self-pleasure, or masturbation, is often discussed in whispers, if at all. But in the later years of life, it takes on a new kind of meaning. It becomes a way of staying connected to the rhythm of being alive, a way of reminding yourself that your body is still yours, still capable of feeling, of soft delight, of deep comfort. It's not just a physical act, it is a quiet affirmation. I am still here, I still belong to myself. And yet, many older adults carry unspoken questions. Is this still normal? Is it healthy? Should I feel guilty for needing this, for wanting this? If these questions have ever lived inside you, even for a moment, I want you to know you are not alone, and more importantly, you are not wrong. In the next few minutes, let's explore this experience with compassion, clarity, and a touch of bravery. Let us speak gently about a topic that so many have buried in silence. Let us rediscover what it means to feel pleasure again, not with urgency, but with honor. Because the truth is, pleasure does not belong to the young, it belongs to the living. As we age, the body speaks in different tones. Where there was once fire, there may now be warmth. Where there was once urgency, there may now be depth. But make no mistake, the desire to feel, to connect, to experience the pleasure of being alive, it does not vanish with the years, it only changes its rhythm. Hormones begin to quiet. Testosterone, estrogen, those inner fuels that once sparked hunger with barely a thought, begin to ebb. Sensations that once came easily may now require more time, more attention, more care. But in that slowing down, something else becomes possible. Without the pressure of youth, without the noise of expectations, we are invited to enter a more personal relationship with our bodies. Self-pleasure in later life is no longer about performance or release. It becomes about presence. It becomes about honoring the way your body still wants to be known. It may begin with a simple breath, a gentle awareness of touch, a quiet curiosity about what still brings you comfort. And what many older adults discover, often in private, sometimes by surprise, is that their body, even now, still responds. Not always in the ways it used to, but in ways that are perhaps more meaningful, more honest. You do not need anyone else to validate that. In fact, one of the most healing aspects of self-pleasure is how deeply it belongs to you alone. It asks for nothing but your attention. It offers relief not only in the physical sense, but in the emotional sense as well. There's power in that. When you touch your body with care, you send a message, not just through your skin, but deep into your heart. You say, I still matter. You say, I accept myself as I am now. And if you've spent a lifetime taking care of others, showing up for responsibilities, putting your needs aside, then these moments of private intimacy may be the first time in years that you've truly returned to yourself. That is not selfish. That is sacred. Because this connection with your own body does not just soothe the skin, it soothes the soul. For many in their 60s, 70s, even 80s and beyond, the act of self-respect becomes a quiet, resilient form of self-respect. It becomes a place where you can feel alive without needing to perform, a place where you can feel peace, even if the rest of the world forgets to notice you. And the body, though it changes, though it softens, remembers how to receive. It remembers how to give. And when approached with tenderness, it responds not with fireworks, but with light. A light that says, you are still whole. In this stage of life, intimacy is not about returning to how things used to be. It is about discovering what is possible now. And in the quiet, personal space of self-pleasure, what is possible may surprise you. In the silence of aging, many things begin to slip away: routines, relationships, even roles we once held with pride. But within that stillness, something extraordinary can take root. The quiet practice of self-pleasure, when embraced with kindness and intention, becomes far more than a private act. It becomes a bridge between the body and the spirit. Physically, the benefits are quiet but profound. With age, our bodies are more prone to tension, stiffness, and reduced circulation, especially in the areas we no longer engage with as often. Regular self-tigget, when done with care and moderation, helps maintain blood flow to the genital region. This simple act keeps tissues from weakening due to disuse. It preserves elasticity. It promotes responsiveness. In a way, it keeps the door open, reminding the body that it still matters, that it's still alive. But beyond the mechanics, there is something deeper at play. Each time you allow yourself to experience pleasure, your brain responds with a quiet flood of chemicals: endorphins, dopamine, oxytocin. These are the natural medicines your body produces to soothe stress, to ease anxiety, to quiet sadness. In younger years, we may have taken this for granted, but in the golden years, when days may grow long and nights even longer, this gentle flood becomes essential. It lifts a fog of loneliness. It calms the restlessness that visits the mind before sleep. It reminds you, not through words but through sensation, that you are still capable of joy. And that matters. It matters more than many people realize. Because aging does not simply affect the muscles and bones, it affects the way we feel about ourselves. It whispers questions like, am I still desirable? Do I still have value? Is this body, with its changes and wear, still worth loving? Self-pleasure offers one clear, unspoken answer. Yes, you are still whole. Yes, your body is still a vessel for tenderness, for connection, for healing. There is also emotional power in the choice itself. When you choose to care for your own body, to show up for yourself in that private space, you reclaim something that the world often forgets to give to older adults: agency. You take back your right to feel. You say to yourself, I will not wait for permission. I will not abandon myself just because others have turned away. And in that space you begin to heal, not from pain alone, but from neglect, from silence, from years of being taught that this part of you should no longer exist. That is the gift of self-pleasure. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is gentle, dignified, and deeply human. It does not require you to be young. It does not ask you to be perfect. It simply invites you back into your body as it is right now and offers comfort that is both immediate and lasting. Even your sleep improves. When the body has released its tension and the mind has tasted peace, rest comes more easily. Night becomes less of a battle and more of a quiet return to stillness. And the next morning, you rise with a little more softness in your shoulders, a little more ease in your breath. Not because everything is perfect, but because, in a small way, you remembered how to take care of yourself. That is no small thing. In fact, it is everything. As with all things in life, even what is beautiful must be held with care. Self-pleasure, when guided by awareness, can be a quiet blessing, but without that awareness, it can begin to blur into something else. Not connection, but escape. Not healing, but habit. And for many older adults, especially those living alone, that line is easier to cross than one might expect. The truth is, loneliness can be subtle. It doesn't always arrive with tears or sadness. Sometimes it hides beneath routines that seem harmless. You wake up, go through the motions, and reach for the one thing that brings comfort. At first, it feels like a way to soothe the silence, a way to forget, even for a moment, that no one is calling, no one is holding your hand, no one is waiting at the kitchen table. But slowly, without realizing it, that comfort becomes the center of your emotional life. And that is when self-pleasure begins to change. It stops being a mindful gesture of self-love. It becomes a coping mechanism, a retreat, a way to avoid the deeper aches that lie beneath. You may find yourself doing it not out of desire but out of restlessness. Not because it brings peace but because it fills time. Not because you feel joy but because you fear what you might feel without it. And in that repetition, something important begins to slip away. Your openness to connection. The more time you spend in solitude, the harder it becomes to reach out, to call a friend, to join a group, to invite someone in. This is not weakness, it is simply human behavior. When we rely too heavily on one source of comfort, no matter how private, no matter how natural, it can begin to isolate us from the very relationships that would bring deeper healing. There are also physical consequences, though they tend to appear more quietly. With frequent overstimulation, the nerves in the genital area can become overly sensitive. At first, this might seem harmless, even pleasurable, but over time, it may result in discomfort or a sense of diminished satisfaction. You might feel frustrated that what once brought relief now feels harder to reach, that the body seems to demand more intensity, yet offers less in return. This too can be discouraging. It can lead to anxiety, self-doubt, even shame. And shame, especially in later life, is a heavy burden to carry. Many older adults grew up in times where conversations about pleasure were absent, or worse, filled with fear. For them, the act of self-taught was never discussed as healthy. It was hidden, dismissed, judged. And those old beliefs do not simply vanish with age. They often linger in the background, shaping how one feels about their own needs, their own hands, their own desire to be close, even if only to themselves. So, when someone who carries that internal history begins to struggle with frequency or dissatisfaction, it is not just the body that suffers, it is the heart. Guilt begins to speak. It whispers, "Maybe I'm wrong for doing this." It whispers, "Maybe this means I'm weak, or broken, or dependent." And slowly, the very thing that once brought comfort begins to create distance, not only from others, but from your own sense of self-worth. But here is the truth that must be remembered. You are not broken. You are not wrong. You are simply human. And when something you once turned to for peace begins to feel like a burden, it is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that you are ready for something deeper. A new balance, a new beginning. For those who live alone, self-pleasure often becomes a quiet companion. It fills a space that might otherwise feel cold or forgotten. But for those who are still in a relationship, especially long-term partnerships built over decades, it can carry different consequences. Not because the act itself is wrong, but because of what can happen when it replaces something deeper. In a healthy relationship, physical intimacy is not simply about bodies touching. It is about connection, about trust, about presence. The kind of presence that says, I see you, I still choose you, even now. But as the years go by, routines settle in, energy fluctuates, health changes, and for many couples, those quiet moments of affection, the shared beds, the quiet laughter, the way you reach for each other in the dark, begin to fade. In those gaps, self-pleasure can seem easier. It asks for no coordination, no communication. It arrives when you want, how you want. It gives a sense of control when so much else in aging feels unpredictable. But over time, if you reach for yourself more than you reach for your partner, something begins to shift. Not immediately, not loudly, just slowly. A conversation goes unspoken. A moment of touch is missed. And slowly, the space between you widens. Their partner may not know why they feel neglected. They may not realize that it's not rejection they sense, but redirection. That your intimacy has become solitary. That you are no longer turning toward them, but inward, over and over again. This doesn't make you a bad person. Makes you human. Because in a world that doesn't talk openly about aging and desire, many older adults are left to figure it out on their own. They do the best they can to navigate shifting hormones, changing bodies, and the quiet fears that creep in with age. But in silence, misunderstandings grow. So the solution is not to hide or to feel ashamed. The solution is honesty. The first kind of honesty is with yourself. Ask yourself, is this act helping me feel more connected to life? Or is it helping me avoid the risk of vulnerability with someone else? Then, if you're in a relationship, consider opening a gentle conversation. You don't need to explain every detail. You only need to share the truth that matters. Or, I still desire connection. I still want to feel close. I'm just not always sure how to begin anymore. Sometimes, that small confession is enough to reopen the door. From there, self-pleasure can return to its rightful place, not as a replacement for shared intimacy, but as a quiet complement. A way to maintain a healthy relationship with your own body while still holding space for the presence of someone else. In fact, for many couples, learning to talk about desire in older age creates a deeper bond than anything they had in their youth. It removes the pressure. It allows for new ways of touching, of expressing love, of simply being close. Because love changes with time, so does intimacy. But neither one has to disappear. They simply need new soil to grow in. So if you are in a relationship or hope to find one again, remember this. Self-pleasure can be part of your life, but it should never take the place of love. Let it serve you, not separate you. Let it remind you that you are alive, and that, if you choose to, you can share that aliveness with someone else. For many people entering their later years, the act of self-pleasure is not just a private habit. It is a quiet battlefield. Not because the body resists, but because the mind does. There are those who were raised in homes where touch was not talked about, where desire was whispered about in hushed tones or never mentioned at all, where pleasure was framed as something selfish, something shameful, or something only meant for the young and married. And although decades may have passed, those messages linger. They show up in the small voice that says, "This is wrong." They echo in the silence after pleasure, when a sense of guilt rises uninvited. They sit heavy on the chest, turning something natural into something confusing. But here is what must be said, gently, but clearly. You are not wrong for wanting to feel good. You are not broken because your body still responds. You are not dirty, or selfish, or foolish, for reaching toward your own skin with curiosity and care. You are simply human. Pleasure is not a privilege of the young. It is not something you must retire from when the mirror starts showing lines. It is not something you lose the right to just because your role in the world has shifted. Pleasure is a part of being alive. And if no one ever told you that before, let this be the moment you begin to believe it. The feelings of guilt and shame you carry are not yours alone. They were passed to you, quietly, through culture, through silence, through the way certain topics were avoided at the dinner table. They were inherited, not earned. Which means they can be unlearned. You can begin again. You can speak to yourself in a new voice, a kinder one that says, "This body is mine, and it has carried me far. It deserves comfort, not criticism. It deserves affection, not avoidance." This act of letting go of shame is not instant. It is a slow unwinding. But with each step, you loosen the grip of old beliefs and replace them with something far more healing, self-compassion. And that is where freedom begins. When you no longer feel the need to apologize for your humanity. When you stop judging your needs through the lens of someone else's discomfort. When you finally recognize that what lives in your body, even now, is not something to be hidden, but something to be honored. That is not just healing, that is liberation. There comes a moment, often quiet and unspoken, when something once comforting begins to feel like too much. Self-pleasure, when rooted in care and awareness, can be a beautiful ritual, a private expression of self-love. But when it becomes a way to avoid, rather than to connect, when it becomes a habit shaped by loneliness, boredom, or anxiety, it can begin to steal more than it gives. This shift rarely happens all at once. It begins slowly. Perhaps you notice that you're turning to it not out of desire but out of habit. Perhaps it becomes part of your daily rhythm, something automatic, something that feels necessary to fall asleep or to quiet your mind. At first it may seem harmless, but over time it can leave you feeling more tired than satisfied, not just physically, but emotionally. Because when self-pleasure becomes the only source of comfort, it may start to crowd out the other forms of nourishment your soul truly needs. Conversation, movement, nature, laughter, even silence that isn't filled with stimulation. You may begin to feel a subtle sense of depletion. The body feels restless. The mind grows foggy. Motivation fades. And deep beneath it all, a quiet voice may whisper, "Is this still serving me?" This is not a moment for shame, it is a moment for honesty. Ask yourself gently, is this bringing me closer to the life I want, or is it helping me avoid something I haven't yet faced? There is no need to rush the answer, just ask. And then, begin to look for small ways to reconnect with the world around you. Step outside for fresh air, let the sun warm your face. Pick up a book that stirs your imagination. Call someone you've been meaning to reach out to. Stretch your body, even for 5 minutes. Move your energy, change your rhythm, not because you're punishing yourself, but because you are inviting in new forms of pleasure, new ways to feel alive. You don't need to stop self-pleasure completely. You only need to place it gently back in balance, as one of many ways you care for yourself. And if you find that you struggle to set limits or feel trapped in a cycle of craving and regret, know that support is available. Speaking to a therapist, a doctor, or even a compassionate friend can help untangle the emotional roots of what you're experiencing. There is no weakness in seeking help, there is only courage. You deserve a life that is not just stimulated, but fulfilled. Not just distracted, but engaged. Not just soothed, but nourished. The journey toward balance is not about restriction. It is about returning to the full picture of what it means to be human, to feel, to grow, to reach. In the end, the conversation is not really about masturbation. It is about presence. It is about dignity. It is about remembering that even in the quietest years of our lives, we still have the right and the ability to feel good in our bodies and at peace in our hearts. Too often, the world treats aging like an exit, as if your desires no longer count, as if your body is no longer worthy, as if tenderness belongs only to the past. But those ideas are false. They are narrow stories that shrink the truth of who you are. Because the truth is, your body has carried you across decades. It has learned, endured, healed, and adapted. It deserves kindness, not rejection. And pleasure, the warm, private kind that makes you feel human again, is one of the ways you can offer that kindness. When practiced in balance, self-pleasure is not a distraction, it is a reminder, a quiet declaration that says, I still belong to myself. I still feel, I still care, and just as importantly, I still choose to live well. That is a kind of power the world doesn't often talk about. Is that it doesn't come with applause, but it is real. And for many older adults, it is transformative. Because this practice is not just physical, it is emotional, it is spiritual, it is the choice to stay connected to your body even when the world wants you to disconnect. So, if you've struggled with guilt or shame or fear, let this be your invitation to begin again. With compassion, with understanding, with self-respect. You do not need to rush. You do not need to explain. You only need to listen to your body, to your feelings, to your truth. And as you listen, remember that pleasure at its best is not about chasing intensity. It is about honoring sensitivity. It is not about reaching a goal. It is about enjoying the moment. It is not about age. It is about awareness. So whatever season of life you are in now, whatever history you carry, whatever questions still linger in the quiet, know this: you are allowed to feel good. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to come home to yourself, not just through thoughts, but through touch, through grace. Aging is not a departure from intimacy. It is an invitation to experience it more deeply, more gently, and more honestly than ever before. And perhaps in this softer, wiser chapter of life, you'll find that the most meaningful pleasure is the one that brings you back to wholeness.